Mexico to play in CONMEBOL? All right. Per a report from journalist Martín del Palacio on his podcast Desde el Bar, Gianni Infantino allegedly promised to help FMF, the Mexican Footballing Federation, to leave CONCACAF and join CONMEBOL, Copa America, Eliminatorias, World Cup qualifying, and club soccer in exchange for Mexico lobbying for his reelection. It's only one single source. It's unconfirmed. FMF has not responded, but it has spread like wildfire. And it may explain a bit of the mystery of why FMF has publicly backed Gianni Infantino. Context here, Gianni Infantino, he reportedly is in trouble. There are reports, but one could put one and one together, two and two together, and indicate that the rest of the world is not happy. UEFA, CONCACAF, Asian football, they have all written open letters where they've expressed the problems in leadership, and pretty much without saying, they've not said resign, but they've implied step aside. So let's go through very quickly what we make of the report. It is one unconfirmed report. I know Martin. I do not question Martin's integrity, but oftentimes there are people in football who try to influence a narrative through reporters, and they use reporters to get word out there. This is a big story, a massive story. The likes of Ruben Rodriguez in Fox Sports, Leon Lecanda, ESPN, a bunch of different people at TUDN, which is the Televisa network, which is the house network for the Mexican national team and the Mexican Federation, all have said they cannot confirm a single thing. They've questioned these things as well. So let's just go through and talk about the realistic scenarios of this happening. Mechanically, is it possible? Politically, how it looks? There are special cases where this has happened in the past. Most would bring up Australia and how Australia left from the Oceania Confederation to the Asian Confederation. It's not as cut and dry. Here's why the Australia comparison is wrong. Australia wanted to, in the end, have a direct qualifying spot. Oceania wasn't directly responsible or couldn't directly give them a qualification spot for the World Cup. So no direct World Cup berth. There was very little competition, very little money. They had nothing to lose. Mexico's situation is the opposite. You're trading up competitively. I don't think anybody could argue that. But you're walking away and torching, a commercial model that is thriving on many fronts. You're leaving the richest bilateral market in the world. What's the case where I could say, okay, this would make sense for Mexican football? Let's go through it, okay? Mexico is a juggernaut when it comes to being a commercial asset. Some United Marketing, which is in New York, which is a marketing arm of Major League Soccer, does all the marketing for the Mexican national team. They do Mex Tour, which is going on now on its 23rd year, if I'm not mistaken, within the continental United States. They play a majority of their games within the United States. These games are friendlies. I understand this. Now, many would say they don't need CONCACAF to play games within the United States. They only need U.S. Soccer for U.S. Soccer's permission. That's not necessarily true. That is true when they are both within the same confederation. Only U.S. Soccer has to give the green light. But when they are now in a different confederation, CONCACAF, through their Article 6, can do what they want and say, no, you will not play here. It needs to be signed off by CONCACAF. It needs to be signed off by FIFA, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a given they will do this. Now, you're asking a team with a market like the U.S. to eliminate that market and the sponsorships that go in with those game days. Not only the ticket sales, not only the vending, I'm talking about sponsors, game day sponsors, the announcements, the marketing, all these different things, the game day revenue that comes from TV broadcast rights, games within the United States. You're asking them to walk away from millions. And you're asking CONCACAF and U.S. Soccer themselves to walk away from millions. It's not going to happen that way, okay? What's the case for this actually happening? Well, if you're a Mexican national team fan, if you're a Mexican Liga MX fan, uh, the sporting landscape is much more enticing. You get CONMEBOL qualifiers, World Cup qualifiers, and a Copa America every cycle. You're going to get Copa Libertadores and a Sudamericana every cycle. You're not going to be in the comfort zone that is CONCACAF. You're not going to be only playing against the likes of the U.S. men's national team and Canada and every other year, maybe a Costa Rica or a Panama. You're going to be going against the likes of Argentina. Lionel Messi, we don't know, but quality players. The likes of Brazil, yes, Rafinha, Vini Jr., this type of player, Carlo Ancelotti led type of Brazil. You're going to be going against the likes of a Colombia, the likes of a Uruguay now with Diego Forlan, the likes of Ecuador, not just at home, but away. Bolivia en el alto, at altitude. The competition will be greater. A good generation of Venezuelan players, the rebirth of Chilean football, you know, a lot better players. So the elimination games will be an iron sharpening the iron. That is one thing that really draws. And then there's the TV product that could be within Mexico and maybe the United States, because somebody's going to have these games in the United States. Even though you won't play games in the United States, that will still be worth something within the United States. Home and away versus Argentina, Brazil is much more enticing than you doing a home away versus Curacao and Guyana. Apologies to Curacao and Guyana. Um, but that is how you take the next step. Iron sharpening iron through osmosis. That is what you do. The thought of Mexican players constantly being involved in a Copa Libertadores, a team like America, Tigres, both Monterrey teams, Cruz Azul, even a Chivas, that's enticing. The problem, and we'll get into a problem in a second, but those are enticing things. Those could only give your players more of a platform when they're playing against the likes of Brazilian teams. And one could argue that it would force more spending because Brazilian football has dominated Copa Libertadores. They've won like 7 of the last 8 finals. I believe 6 of the last 8 finals have been all Brazilian, something crazy like that. You're going to have to come in and spend big if you want to compete with the Brazilians, which will raise the floor for the 1%. For the teams that can afford to raise the floor. It's not going to raise the floor for a Querétaro. It's not going to raise the floor for a Necaxa. It's not going to raise the floor for a team like Santos. Maybe won't raise the floor for a team like Pumas. That's a reality. And you're going to see more of the haves and have-nots within your own domestic football. You get away from this Leagues Cup that's no longer on the table. You get away from the MLS Liga MX relationship that's no longer on the table. You get away from the U.S. men's national team, Mexico merger of the two where the competition's shoved down your throat all the time. You get away from those things if you think those are negatives for Mexican football. That's a positive for you. Now, here is a negative. The case against this not happening. Besides the fact that it's bribery, let's not bury the lead. That's what Gianni Infantino here is doing. He is saying, do this for me and I will do that for you. Okay? Besides that case, the morality, the moral compass, the conscience that you should have when it comes to what you think is morally correct. Besides that, the case against this is the friendlies go out the window. Okay? With the friendlies, and say what you will about the friendlies, there is money involved. And if you can't host this in the United States, then you're leaving lots of money on the table. Gold Cup, Nations League, no longer have the same spice as they once did. Gold Cup is a tournament where it is by design made for the U.S. men's national team in Mexico to meet in the final. One on one side, one on the other, and if they both do what they're supposed to do, they will meet in the final where they can sell it off. Nations League, same thing. If you don't have Mexico, the golden goose, the cash cow at the table, what's it worth? And it's not only CONCACAF, the U.S., and the rest of the host nations or nations in this confederation that are losing out. It's Mexico as well. They have greater value in the United States than they do in South America. Commercially, in terms of how they tout themselves out and the revenue that they could accrue, this is greater within the United States. They are the golden goose. There's a sporting risk. We could say that World Cup qualifying will go from 48 to 64 or maybe beyond, and World Cup qualifying will be a given if you're in CONMEBOL. But if it's not, it's a lot more on that meat. On the bone of the meat you got to chew. It's Argentina, it's Brazil, it's Colombia, it's Uruguay, and it's the likes of Ecuador. That's 5 right there. They're quality opponents, and you say we just beat Ecuador. Then you'd have to go into Ecuador. You have to go into Brazil. You have to go into Argentina, and then it's Bolivia at altitude, and it's Venezuela. And then it's a team like Chile who's looking for a rebirth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a given here that you will always qualify. If anything, the gauntlet got thrown down and you could miss qualification, leaving out more of the millions of dollars on the table that could go out the window. And the logistics would just be insane, both from a club perspective to a national team perspective. And you're only looking out for the 1%. That's what you're saying here. Oh, the 1% can afford to do it. Tigres can afford to do it. Cruz Azul can afford to do it. What about the rest if they get there? We're talking about continental travel. We're talking about, the European-based players now flying to South America every window. The club friction, that CONCACAF really didn't get you involved in. It's not the easiest, cleanest of scenarios. Now, what I think is happening here, okay, is that there's posturing going on. That Mexico says, I know my worth, buddy. I know my worth. And you're not giving me my worth. I want more. So this is posturing. They get their, if it is true, this report, they get their information across to somebody who spreads this, reports this, and now you're starting to think about what Mexico actually brings to the table. They're the big player in the room. They know their worth. They know exactly who they are and what they bring to the table. This is posturing at the very best. I don't think Mexico wants to leave CONCACAF. I know CONCACAF would not want Mexico to leave CONCACAF. They don't want them to leave the table. They understand what they bring. The power, the economic power. They understand the motor that it is within the United States. That's not going to happen. Mexico's intelligent, the federation, if anything, and they understand the bottom dollar. When Gianni Infantino first came out with the private equity all by himself and wanted to sell off stake in the World Cup, everybody was against him and said, we are overwhelmingly against Gianni Infantino, and this is going on, et cetera, et cetera. Mexico said, in their own words, their own statement, we want to see and analyze how this benefits us. Their own words. That was their statement. We will analyze how this benefits us. They are not stupid. They don't care about the sporting landscape. Do not get confused. They're not looking out for you, the fan, or the players. They're looking out for the bottom dollar. And the bottom dollar isn't in CONMEBOL. The bottom dollar is in CONCACAF, which is why I think this will never happen. Crazier things have happened. I'll give you that. Look at golf, live golf, as my colleague Sebastian Salazar brought up in one of our last episodes. But I don't see it happening because of the money. Live golf happened because of the money. I don't see this happening because of the money. CONMEBOL doesn't have that type of money. Not for Mexico. Mexico understands their worth is more within CONCACAF. And Gianni Infantino is grasping at straws. He's reading the room right now. There are open letters, not calling for his resignation, but questioning leadership and saying it's time for somebody else. They're asking him to step aside. That is what is happening. So he's grasping at straws and trying to do anything and everything to get himself out of this situation. So if there is a vote of no confidence, and tomorrow there was a vote for Gianni Infantino, yes or no, he would get as many votes to support him, to keep him in power as humanly possible. Our man flew too close to the sun. That's what he did. It's money and power, greed. That's what it was. This report does not have to be true for this to matter. Okay? We can go there and speculate on what it would be like. This report does not have to be true for one to realize the worth that Mexico has within their own confederation, CONCACAF. It is interesting, though. It is interesting. Take yourself there if you want and imagine a world within Copa Libertadores and CONCACAF and that what would that might look like for you. But do not excuse how this is going about. Do not excuse how gross of a feeling you should have, but just entertaining the idea. Let's go there. We can go there. But don't give Gianni Infantino and FIFA an out here. Do not. And I'm not saying there's better out there because nobody wins here when we're talking about FIFA. It's bad guys and worse guys. That's what we're talking about. I'd love to hear your take on the situation. I always do. On the whole Infantino and Mexico thing. And then the possibility of CONMEBOL, Copa Libertadores World Cup qualifiers, and how you got there if you get there. Let your boy know.